I would say one of the most impactful things I've gained from it recently, especially in the context of recent times, in the midst of the coronavirus, the pandemic, which hopefully is stabilizing, but one of the things I've learned from our authors at Empirics is we have this writer who's actually a researcher at a university currently looking into how the developments in the food logistics industry, food delivery industry, has actually changed food itself and the food business. And I think it's so fascinating. It's something that I never really thought about, and in my other work, aside from Empirics, it's actually benefited me in gaining a better understanding. But the question is this: I think we all know by now that definitely the coronavirus and this pandemic has really led an evolution in many industries, especially in the food industry, where you had all these restrictions and lockdown, and that's really changed on the consumers and consumption behavior, how we have dinners, but also how these restaurants have reacted to that. So, for example, there's been a massive growth of food delivery apps and also the usage. Definitely, you look at most of Southeast Asia, there's been a massive rise in number of statistics of the users actually, using Grab, for example, every day. So, from a perspective, some might think that's actually great because that means that these restaurants, they've been able to sort of survive this pandemic so far, and maybe it's even an opportunity for some restaurants, as some restaurants, previously they were not really discovered or anything. Now they're at the centralized place and then been able to find and serve customers beyond their actual areas, beyond their hinterland, and that sounds all great and optimistic, but actually something else going on behind the scenes, because the economics of food logistics is actually incredibly harsh and dire for restaurants and food businesses, especially for most apps. And I don't want to, focus on any in particular and try and name shame them, because obviously, there are a few, especially in different markets, but they all take a commission actually out of the cut of actually delivering the food to the consumers, and it is a very big cut. It goes all the way up for some apps to 35%. So that means that these restaurant businesses, when they actually deliver through one of the food delivery apps, they are actually losing out a substantial part. It's a substantial cost for them. And a lot of restaurants have definitely complained about it. A lot of restaurants have even tried to sidestep by saying, to their customers, don't use the app, just directly call us, maybe come and collect, or all sorts of ways to try and circumvent that. But that is a massive cost that has actually put a lot of financial pressure on many restaurants and has actually caused a very sort of disastrous situation for some. And it's not only impacting these tiny mom and pop restaurants, these small, medium restaurants, even big ones. For example, recently, a lot of the franchisees of McDonald's have actually complained overall altogether that delivery apps have actually totally capitalized on their financial performance. So even if a massive chain like McDonald's can feel the immense pressure of food delivery just from the logistical cost itself, then the question is, what about the tiny and the small and the medium, these independent restaurants? What sort of impact do they have? Obviously, it's very dire, so that's one thing. But the second thing as well is, consumption patterns change as more and more of us start to get more used to, eating through delivery. What does it mean to many of the restaurants out there as they're trying to really stabilize their business? Perhaps on a sociological level, and this is what the research of the author actually really looked at, on a sociological level, there's also going to be a slight change in how we approach food, and maybe, good for the delivery apps, good for our convenience, that most of us could get very used to eating, at home and whatnot. But what about many of these restaurants that actually do depend on the business of people actually dining in, as we are all getting more used to actually ordering food and eating out and having the convenience of that? What sort of long-term impacts does that actually bring? And that's a very interesting area as we look at, for example, the rise of cloud kitchens and whatnot. Sure, dining is still experienced for some restaurants where the ambiance and perhaps the gastronomical experience is so amazing that you have to be there, but certainly we can't say that for all. And there's bound to be impact, according to the study done by one of our authors. And so that's a very interesting thing when you think about progress in terms of, and also evolution in terms of how we have a very optimistic view of how, due to our ingenuity, due to the ingenuity of these tech entrepreneurs and these apps, we're really saviors and it's really helping businesses. But at the same time, there's also a lot of unspoken costs, both financial, but perhaps even sociological in a sense, that threaten many of the existing establishments, especially in the food industry. And that's a very interesting thing to look at that we don't really think about. And that's certainly something new that I learned from this article from one of our brilliant authors, this food researcher. And again, things like this, I think it's very important to understand, because certainly I can attest to the fact that I do eat out a lot as well. But now you start to appreciate how these food entrepreneurs are really trying so hard to navigate just the entire change of landscape that they find themselves in. And truly you have to respect that on some level.